The red dress hung in my closet like a question mark. Vibrant, hopeful, perhaps too eager for a 62-year-old woman. I'd bought it 3 weeks ago, imagining how Benjamin would smile when he saw me wearing it. "You look beautiful, Mom," he'd say, the way he used to when I dressed up for his school plays or graduation ceremonies, back when I mattered. I slipped it on anyway, the silk cool against my skin. The mirror reflected a woman who had learned to hide her loneliness behind carefully applied lipstick and forced smiles. Margaret Waters. That was still my name, though I'd been divorced from Benjamin's father for 15 years. Some identities stick longer than marriages. The phone buzzed. A text from Benjamin. "Looking forward to lunch, Mom." The usual place. 1 p.m. My heart did that embarrassing flutter it always did when he reached out. At 35, he was still my baby, though he'd hate hearing that. Successful, handsome, with his father's stubborn jaw and my grandmother's green eyes. A real estate developer with a penthouse downtown and a social media presence that made him look like he lived in perpetual sunshine. I arrived at Romano's 15 minutes early, clutching my purse like a shield. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to our usual table by the window. The restaurant buzzed with the warm chaos of Mother's Day, flowers on every table, children presenting hand-drawn cards, laughter echoing off the walls. "Your son will be joining you?" she asked, arranging the napkins with practiced efficiency. "Yes, any minute now." The lie came easily. I'd been telling versions of it for months. 1 o'clock came and went. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Rosa, approached with patient sympathy. "Would you like to order an appetizer while you wait?" "He's just running late," I said, my voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. You know how traffic can be. By 1:30, I couldn't ignore the pitying glances from other tables. A mother at the next table was opening a jewelry box while her daughter and son-in-law watched with delight. The woman's face glowed with the particular contentment of being cherished. My phone remained silent. I ordered the salmon, Benjamin's favorite, telling myself he'd arrive just as the food came. The waitress brought bread rolls I didn't want and water I couldn't drink past the lump in my throat. Around me, families celebrated with the easy intimacy I'd once taken for granted. "Are you dining alone today?" Rosa asked gently when she brought my entree. "My son is." I started, then stopped. The truth sat heavy in my chest like a stone. "Yes, I'm dining alone." She nodded without judgment, the way servers learn to navigate the complicated geography of human disappointment. "The salmon looks perfect. Chef's specialty." I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The restaurant's warmth felt oppressive now, all that joy pressing against my careful composure. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media to distract myself from the symphony of Mother's Day happiness surrounding me. That's when I saw it. Benjamin's Instagram story posted 20 minutes ago. A photo of him at Lab Bernardin, the expensive seafood place across town. He was smiling broadly, his arm around a woman I recognized. Christine, his stepmother, his father's second wife, the one who'd swooped in 2 years after our divorce with her perfect figure, her perfect cooking, and her perfect ability to make Richard feel young again. The caption read, "Mother's Day lunch with my real mother. Grateful for the woman who taught me what family means. Blessed real mom. Grateful." The phone slipped from my hands, clattering onto the table. Several diners turned to look, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they registered my face. Real mother. The words echoed in my mind like a slap. I thought of the 35 years I'd spent raising him, the sleepless nights when he had colic, the soccer games where I cheered until my voice gave out, the college tuition I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for. I thought of the divorce, how I'd protected him from the worst of his father's cruelty, how I'd swallowed my own pain to make sure he still felt loved. Real mother. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Rosa had appeared beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. I looked up at her, this stranger who'd shown me more kindness in the past hour than my own son had in months. "I'm fine," I whispered, though we both knew it was a lie. She glanced at my phone, still displaying Benjamin's post. Her expression hardened with recognition. Some people, she said quietly, don't deserve the love they're given. I paid the check with shaking hands, leaving a generous tip for Rose's kindness. The walk to my car felt endless. Every step weighed with the crushing realization that I'd been living in a fantasy. Benjamin hadn't forgotten about lunch. He'd chosen not to come. He'd chosen her. Real mother. At home, I sat in my kitchen, still wearing the red dress, staring at the Mother's Day card I'd saved from last year, the last one he'd given me. It featured a generic message about love and gratitude, signed simply, Ben, in his hurried scrawl. No personal note, no inside joke, no acknowledgement of our shared history. How long had I been sleepwalking through this relationship? How many signs had I ignored? How many small cruelties had I rationalized away? My phone buzzed. A text from Benjamin. Sorry, Mom. Got held up at work. Rain check. The audacity of it stole my breath.
He thought I didn't know.
He thought I was still the same woman who would swallow any excuse, who would smile and nod and pretend everything was fine. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Hurt, angry, desperate. None of them felt right. None of them felt like enough. Finally, I typed, I saw your post. The message showed as read immediately, but no response came. Minutes passed. Then an hour, then two. I sat there as the sun set, still in my red dress, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was something sharper, cleaner, something that felt almost like relief. The old Margaret would have called him, would have demanded an explanation, would have cried and pleaded, and eventually forgiven. The old Margaret would have found a way to make this her fault somehow. But the woman sitting in this kitchen, watching the day die through her window, felt different, changed. The red dress had become a declaration of war, though I didn't know it yet. I opened my laptop and began typing in the search bar, flights to Madrid. The screen filled with possibilities, dates, times, and prices that represented something I'd never allowed myself to consider. Freedom, escape, the chance to become someone who mattered again, even if it was only to herself. My finger hovered over the Book Now button. In the distance, I could hear my neighbor's Mother's Day barbecue, the sound of a family that actually wanted to be together. Real mother. I clicked the button. The confirmation email arrived within minutes, along with a strange sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow, I would pack. The day after that, I would disappear. And Benjamin Scott, my son, my heart, my greatest disappointment, would learn what it meant to lose something you'd never bothered to value. But tonight, I would sit here in my red dress and plan the first day of the rest of my life, a life where I was nobody's consolation prize, nobody's backup plan, nobody's forgotten obligation. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Benjamin. Can we talk? I looked at the message for a long moment, then powered off the phone. Tomorrow, there would be time for talking. Tomorrow, there would be time for explanations and apologies and all the messy emotions that came with broken relationships. But tonight belongs to me. Tonight, I would dream of Spanish sunsets and morning coffee in plazas where nobody knew my name or my history or my failures as a mother. Tonight, I would imagine what it felt like to be someone's real anything again, even if that someone was only myself. The morning after Mother's Day, I woke before dawn with the clarity that comes from absolute certainty. No tears, no second-guessing, no desperate hope that Benjamin would call with some miraculous explanation. The woman who had sat in Romano's restaurant eating salmon alone while her son celebrated with another family was gone. What remained was someone harder, more focused, someone who understood that love was a choice, not an obligation. I had 48 hours before my flight to Madrid. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Benjamin, 12 from his father, Richard, and 3 from Christine. The audacity of that last number almost made me laugh. His stepmother calling to smooth things over with her careful, therapist-approved voice. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. The packing was methodical, surgical. I took only what mattered. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the photo of my mother holding me as a baby, my journals from the past 20 years. Everything else, The furniture Benjamin had promised to help me move, the china set I'd been saving for his future wife, the baby clothes I'd kept from his childhood, stayed behind like evidence of a crime. I called my neighbor, Donna Pelosi, a practical woman in her 70s who'd watched my marriage crumble with the wisdom of someone who'd survived her own disappointments. "I'm going away for a while," I told her, sitting in her kitchen that smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. "Could you keep an eye on the house?" Donna studied my face with sharp brown eyes. "How long is a while?" "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "Good for you. That boy of yours needs to learn some hard lessons." I gave her the spare key, my attorney's contact information, and instructions to forward any important mail to my bank. Everything else could wait or rot. I no longer cared which. The flight to Madrid felt like stepping through a portal. I'd chosen Spain on impulse, remembering a college course on Spanish literature where I dreamed of walking through the Prado Museum, of sitting in cafes where Hemingway once wrote, dreams I'd set aside for marriage, for motherhood, for the endless small sacrifices that had somehow added up to the erasure of myself. Benjamin's calls followed me across the Atlantic. I watched his name flash on the screen as we flew over the ocean, feeling nothing but a strange sort of peace. The flight attendant, a woman named Janet with kind eyes and perfect English, brought me wine and asked if I was traveling alone. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a celebration. I rented a small apartment in Madrid's Malesana neighborhood, a bohemian area full of narrow streets and hidden courtyards. The landlord, a man named Federico Webb, spoke broken English mixed with animated Spanish and seemed delighted to have an American tenant who paid 3 months in advance and asked no questions. "You are a writer?" he asked, gesturing at my single suitcase. "Artist. I'm figuring that out," I said, and he nodded as if this made perfect sense. The apartment was tiny but perfect, a studio with tall windows that opened onto a courtyard where an old woman hung laundry every morning and sang opera arias off-key. There was a small kitchen, a narrow bed, and a desk where I could sit and watch the world go by. For the first week, I did nothing but exist. I bought groceries at the market, learned to order coffee in Spanish, and walked through the city until my feet ached. I turned off my phone's international roaming and used the apartment's Wi-Fi only to check my bank account and read Spanish news websites with the help of Google Translate. Benjamin's missed calls accumulated like unpaid bills. 17 became 30, then 50, then 73. Richard joined the campaign, then Christine, then people I barely recognized, mutual friends who'd gotten pulled into the drama, distant relatives who'd probably been given some sanitized version of events. I imagine the conversations. "We're worried about Margaret. She's not answering her phone. She just disappeared."
Good.
Let them worry. Let them wonder. Let them feel for once what it was like to need someone who simply wasn't there. The second week I started writing, not about Benjamin or the divorce or the decades of small compromises that had led me to that restaurant table. I wrote about Madrid. The way the light fell across the Plaza Mayor in the afternoon, the taste of churros dipped in chocolate, the sound of Spanish laughter echoing off ancient stone walls. I wrote about the woman I'd been at 22 before I'd learned to make myself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. I wrote about dreams I'd forgotten and desires I'd buried, so deep I'd convinced myself they'd never existed. My phone buzzed occasionally with international notifications, but I'd learned to ignore them. Whatever crisis Benjamin was experiencing, whatever guilt Richard was feeling, whatever careful mediation Christine was attempting, none of it was my problem anymore. 3 weeks into my Spanish adventure, I discovered the cafe. It was tucked into a side street near the Retiro Park, run by a woman named Rosa Pratt Kelly, who'd moved to Madrid from Dublin 30 years ago and never looked back. The cafe served perfect café con leche and had shelves lined with books in a dozen languages. "American?" Rosa asked on my third visit, her Irish accent softened by decades of Spanish. "Temporarily," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true anymore. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "We're all temporary, love. Some of us just admit it." Rosa became my first real friend in Madrid. She was 68, had been married twice, divorced twice, and raised 3 children who visited every Christmas and called her every Sunday. She'd built a life on her own terms, and it showed in everything from her confident stride to her unapologetic laughter. "You're running from something," she said one afternoon, refilling my coffee cup without being asked. "I'm running to something," I corrected. "Same thing, different direction." I told her about Benjamin, about the restaurant, about the social media post that had shattered something I hadn't even realized was already broken. Rosa listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. "My middle son did something similar," she said when I finished. "Chose his father's new family over mine after the divorce. Broke my heart clean in two." "What did you do?" "I let him go. Hardest thing I ever did. But sometimes love means stepping back far enough for someone to see what they've lost." "Did he come back?" Rosa's smile was complicated. "He tried, but by then I'd learned to be happy without him. Changed everything that did." That night, I sat in my small apartment writing in my journal. The words flowed like water. Months of suppressed feelings finally finding expression. I wrote about the years I'd spent making excuses for Benjamin's distance, the way I'd rationalized his increasing coldness as maturity, his growing absence as success. I wrote about the moment I'd realized I'd become a stranger to my own son, and how terrifying it had been to understand that he preferred it that way. My phone, charging silently in the corner, buzzed with another missed call. I glanced at it and saw Benjamin's name followed by a text that read, "Mom, please call me. I need to talk to you." It no longer felt temporary. It felt like home. Benjamin's calls had dropped from daily to weekly, then to sporadic bursts of desperation. I'd learned to recognize the pattern. Silence for 2 weeks, then a flood of messages, voicemails, and texts that painted increasingly dramatic pictures of his distress. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. Please, just call me back. I need to explain. Dad says you're having some kind of breakdown. Let us help you." Breakdown. The word made me laugh until my sides ached. If disappearing from a life that had slowly suffocated me was a breakdown, then I was happily shattered. I'd started teaching English conversation classes at a local community center. My students were a mix of teenagers preparing for university exams and adults hoping to advance their careers. They called me Professor Margaret and brought me small gifts: flowers from their gardens, homemade cookies, books of Spanish poetry with notes scribbled in the margins. Elena, a shy 17-year-old who reminded me of myself at that age, had become my favorite. She stayed after class to practice pronunciation, and we developed an easy friendship that crossed the boundaries of age and culture. "You are different from other Americans," she told me one afternoon as we walked through Retiro Park. "More, how do you say, authentic?" "I'm learning to be myself," I said, and she nodded as if this made perfect sense. It was Elena who was with me when everything changed. We were sitting at an outdoor cafe near the Prado, sharing churros and practicing English idioms when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Spanish number. I almost ignored it. I'd learned to screen calls religiously, but something made me answer. "Diga, Margaret?" The voice was familiar but strained. "It's Benjamin's stepmother. I'm in Madrid. I need to see you." The churro turned to ash in my mouth. "How did you get this number?" "I hired a private investigator. Please don't hang up. I flew here because Benjamin, he's not well, Margaret. He needs you." I looked at Elena, who was watching my face with concern. "Where are you?" "At the Westin Palace. Please just give me an hour." "1 hour, and then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." I should have hung up. Every instinct I developed over the past 6 months screamed at me to end the call, to protect the peace I'd built. But curiosity, or maybe the last ghost of maternal concern, made me agree. The cafe at the Westin, 1 hour. Elena walked with me to the hotel, chattering nervously in Spanish about how beautiful the building was, how expensive the rooms must be. I barely heard her. My mind was racing through possibilities, preparing for manipulation, for guilt, for whatever carefully orchestrated emotional ambush she had planned. Christine looked older than I remembered, her perfect blonde hair showing dark roots, her usually immaculate makeup hastily applied. She sat at a corner table wearing a wrinkled designer dress and clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. Margaret stood when she saw me, and I noticed her hands shaking. Thank you for coming. You look wonderful. I sat across from her without embracing, without warmth, without any of the social niceties I'd once automatically performed. You have 55 minutes. She flinched at my tone. I deserve that. I deserve much worse than that. Yes, you do. Christine stared into her coffee cup. He's been struggling since you left. Really struggling. He lost the Peterson contract. You know, the big residential development. He couldn't focus, couldn't make decisions. He's been drinking too much, sleeping too little. Richard and I are worried about him. Are you? I kept my voice flat, uninterested. Margaret, I know you hate me. I know you think I stole your family, but I never wanted to come between you and Benjamin. That Instagram post, I told him not to write that. I told him it was cruel. But you didn't stop him. No, I didn't stop him. Her voice broke slightly. I was flattered. I was selfish. I wanted to feel like I mattered to him. And now Christine looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Now I see what I've done. Not just to you, but to him. He's carrying so much guilt, so much shame. He keeps saying he's killed the one person who ever loved him unconditionally.
He's right.
The bluntness of my response seemed to shock her. She'd probably expected tears or anger or some maternal softening at the mention of Benjamin's suffering. Margaret, I know I have no right to ask this, but please call him, see him. He's falling apart. I sipped my café con leche, watching tourists stream past the hotel's windows. Do you know what I did for 35 years, Christine? I made excuses for Benjamin's cruelty. I rationalized his selfishness. I convinced myself that his distance was maturity, that his neglect was independence. I turned myself into a pretzel trying to earn love from someone who saw me as an obligation. He doesn't see you that way now.
No.
Now he sees me as someone who might solve his problems. Someone who might make him feel better about himself. Someone who might make his guilt go away so he can go back to ignoring me with a clear conscience. Christine's face crumpled. That's not what this is about, is it? I leaned forward. Tell me, Christine, in all these months that Benjamin has been struggling, has he once, even once, acknowledged what he did to me? Has he apologized for the cruelty of that Mother's Day? Has he taken responsibility for choosing to humiliate me publicly? She was quiet for a long moment. He says he was confused. He says he didn't mean to hurt you. He says he was confused. He says he didn't mean it. I stood, leaving money on the table for my coffee. But what has he done? What has he changed? What has he sacrificed to make amends? Margaret, please. I spent decades teaching Benjamin that his actions had no consequences. That no matter how he treated me, I would always be there, always forgive, always make it easy for him. I taught him that my love was worthless because it was unconditional. I gathered my purse, feeling strangely calm. You flew across an ocean to ask me to rescue him from the consequences of his own choices. Do you know what that tells me? It tells me that nothing has changed. He's still the same person who left me alone in a restaurant on Mother's Day. He's still the same person who called another woman his real mother on social media. The only difference is that now his cruelty is causing him discomfort, and he wants me to make it stop. He's your son.
Yes.
And I'm his mother. A real mother teaches her children that cruelty has consequences. A real mother doesn't enable selfishness by always being available to clean up the mess. I walked toward the hotel lobby, then stopped and turned back. Christine, I want you to give Benjamin a message from me. Tell him that I love him enough to let him face the consequences of his choices. Tell him that I love him enough to not make this easy for him. And tell him that if he truly wants forgiveness, he'll have to earn it. Not with phone calls or guilt trips or intermediaries, but with real change. Margaret, wait. Tell him that when he's ready to take full responsibility for his actions, when he's ready to do the work of becoming a better man, he knows where to find me. But until then, I'm done being his emergency contact. I walked out of the hotel into the Madrid afternoon, leaving Christine at that corner table with her cold coffee and her failed mission. Elena was waiting across the street, studying her phone with the intense focus teenagers apply to everything. Come? She asked as I approached. It was exactly what I expected, I said in Spanish, surprised by how steady my voice was, and exactly what I needed. We walked back through the city center, past the vendors selling flowers and the old men playing chess in the plaza. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd finally put down a burden I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. That evening, I called Rosa and told her about the encounter. She listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding. "You did right," she said when I finished. "Love isn't about making things easy for people. Sometimes it's about making things hard." I feel like I should feel worse about it. I admitted, like I should feel guilty or sad or something. But I don't. No, I feel free. Rosa laughed, that wind chime sound I'd grown to love. "That's because you're finally being a real mother. Not the kind who enables and excuses, but the kind who teaches and holds accountable." After we hung up, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal. The words flowed like water, months of clarity crystallizing into sentences that felt true and clean. I wrote about the woman I'd been, the one who'd confused love with convenience, who'd mistaken enabling for nurturing. I wrote about the woman I was becoming, the one who understood that real love sometimes required distance, that true compassion sometimes looked like cruelty. And I wrote about Benjamin, my son, my heart, my greatest teacher, the boy who'd shown me that unconditional love could become a prison, that endless forgiveness could become a weapon. Tomorrow I would go to the Prado and stand before the Goyas, those paintings of beautiful, terrible truths. I would have coffee with Rosa and Spanish lessons with Elena. I would continue building the life I discovered in my own absence. But tonight, I would sit in my Madrid apartment and feel proud of the mother I'd finally learned to be. The hard one, the honest one, the one who loved her son enough to let him fall. 1 year and 3 months after I disappeared from Benjamin's life, he found me. I was sitting in Rosa's cafe, grading conversation exercises from my advanced English class, when I saw him through the window. He stood across the narrow street like a ghost made flesh, thinner than I remembered, his expensive suit wrinkled and ill-fitting. His face carried the particular exhaustion that comes from months of poor decisions and sleepless nights. For a moment, I felt the old maternal pull, the instinct to rush outside, to hold him, to fix whatever had brought him to my doorstep looking so broken. But that woman was gone, buried somewhere between Madrid's cobblestones and my newfound self-respect. I continued grading papers. Benjamin crossed the street with hesitant steps, like a man approaching a cliff. Through the cafe's glass door, I could see him gathering courage, his hand hovering over the handle. Rosa, who'd been watching the scene unfold from behind the counter, approached my table. "That him?" she asked in her Irish-Spanish accent. "That's him. Looks like hell." "Good." Rosa nodded approvingly and returned to her post. But I saw her position herself where she could intervene if needed. My fierce protector. This woman who'd become more family to me in a year than my son had been in decades. Benjamin finally entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival like a funeral chime. The few other customers glanced up with mild curiosity, then returned to their conversations. To them, he was just another tourist, another American invading their peaceful afternoon. "Mom." I looked up from Elena's essay about her dreams of studying in England. Benjamin stood there for a long moment, apparently unprepared for my lack of reaction. I could see him cataloging the changes: my longer hair, my tan skin, the confidence in my posture that had replaced the apologetic hunch I'd carried for years. "You look," he started then stopped. "Different." "I am different." He shifted his weight, glancing around the cafe as if expecting someone to tell him what to do next. "Can I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from me, without enthusiasm. He sat heavily, his movements carrying the weight of whatever had driven him across an ocean to find me. "I've been trying to reach you for months," he said. "I know. Why didn't you answer?" I set down my red pen and looked at him directly. "Because I didn't want to talk to you." The bluntness seemed to physically wound him. He flinched, his hands fidgeting with his phone. "Mom, I know you're angry." "I'm not angry, Benjamin. Anger implies I still have expectations of you that you failed to meet. I'm past that." "Then what are you?" Free? The word hung between us like a blade. I watched him process it, saw the moment he realized that my absence hadn't been a cry for attention or a manipulation tactic. It had been exactly what it appeared to be, a choice to leave his life entirely. Christine came to see you, he said finally.
She did.
She said you wouldn't listen, that you were cold. Christine experienced me setting boundaries. Perhaps that felt cold to someone accustomed to my previous lack of them. Benjamin leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone I remembered from his childhood when he'd wanted something. Mom, I know I hurt you. I know the Mother's Day thing was wrong. I was confused. I was angry about the divorce still. I stop. The single word cut through his rehearsed explanation like a knife. He blinked, clearly thrown off his script. Benjamin, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. You didn't hurt me on Mother's Day. You revealed who you are. The hurt came from 35 years of my own willful blindness, my own desperate need to believe that if I just loved you enough, you would love me back the same way. I do love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of me being available when you need me. You love the security of knowing I'll always forgive you, always make excuses for you, always clean up whatever mess you've made of your life. But you don't love me, Margaret Waters, as a person deserving of respect and consideration. His face had gone pale. That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my life without wanting something from me? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you considered how your actions might affect me before you took them? The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear the vendors calling their wares, children laughing in the plaza, the ordinary sounds of a world continuing to turn despite the reckoning taking place at this small cafe table. I'm here now, he said finally, his voice small. Yes, you are. And why is that, Benjamin? What catastrophe brought you to Spain?
His jaw tightened.
Things have been difficult since you left. Specifically, I lost some contracts, big ones. I couldn't focus. Couldn't make decisions. My business is falling apart. And what? What else? What else has fallen apart in my absence? He looked away, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. Dad and Christine are having problems. She blames herself for what happened. Keeps saying she drove you away. Their marriage is strained. Anything else? The house. Your house. I was supposed to help you sell it, remember? But you disappeared. And I didn't know what to do with it. The property taxes, the maintenance. It's been expensive. I almost smiled. Of course. My abandoned house had become his financial burden. A daily reminder of my absence that cost him money. Is that all? My friends keep asking about you. I don't know what to tell them. Tell them the truth. Tell them you treated your mother so poorly that she chose to disappear rather than continue being abused. I didn't abuse you. You emotionally discarded me the moment it became convenient. You publicly humiliated me. You replaced me with someone else and then expected me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. What would you call that? Benjamin's composure finally cracked. I called you back. I texted you after Mother's Day. I tried to explain. You sent me a text saying you got held up at work while you were posting pictures of your stepmother online. I panicked. I didn't know how to tell you about Christine's surprise lunch. So, you lied to me instead of canceling with her. You chose her comfort over my dignity. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Benjamin, what do you want from me? Really? What is it you hope to accomplish by coming here? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want you to come home. I want things to go back to the way they were, the way they were. When I was available whenever you needed me, forgiving whatever you did to me, asking nothing in return but the occasional text message or obligatory holiday visit. When we were family, we were never family, Benjamin. We were an addiction pattern. I was addicted to giving you unconditional love, and you were addicted to receiving it without reciprocation. He looked up sharply. That's a horrible thing to say. It's the truth, and the truth is often horrible. Rosa appeared at our table with a fresh café con leche for me and a pointed look at Benjamin.
Sí, Rosa, gracias.
She squeezed my shoulder briefly before returning to the counter, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on Benjamin. "You have a life here," he said, and there was something almost accusing in his tone. "I do. Friends, students, a routine. Yes, you don't need me." I met his eyes directly.
No, Benjamin.
"I don't need you." The words hit him like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, his face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and something that might have been fear. "I need you," he said quietly. "I know, but need isn't love. And I'm done being needed by someone who doesn't value what I give. So, what happens now? You just stay here forever? Pretend you don't have a son?" "I don't pretend anything. I have a son who chose to treat me as disposable. I've chosen to accept that choice and build a life that doesn't depend on his approval or attention." Benjamin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it reflexively, then looked back at me. "My lawyer's been calling. There are papers I need you to sign for the house sale. Financial stuff." And there it was. The real reason for his dramatic journey to Spain. Not love, not remorse, not a genuine desire to repair our relationship, but business, money, the practical inconvenience of my absence. "Email them to me," I said. "I don't have your email." "Then, I guess you'll have to figure it out." I stood, gathering my papers and pen. "Benjamin, I want you to understand something. This isn't punishment. This isn't revenge. This is simply me choosing to protect myself from further harm. You are welcome to be part of my life when you can demonstrate that you value me as more than an emergency contact." How do I do that? I don't know. But I know it starts with taking responsibility for who you've chosen to be, not just apologizing for what you've done. I left him sitting at that table just as he'd left me sitting at Romano's restaurant over a year ago. But unlike that day, I felt no sadness, no second-guessing, no desperate hope that he might chase after me with sudden understanding. I felt proud. Outside, Madrid's afternoon sun warmed my face as I walked toward home. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Class extra mañana. I want to practice the subjunctive." I typed back, "See you then." Behind me, I could see Benjamin through the cafe window, still sitting at our table, staring at his phone with the lost expression of a man who just realized that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. I didn't look back again. 3 days after Benjamin's appearance in Madrid, I received 23 missed calls. I discovered them while having my morning coffee in the courtyard, listening to Senora Martinez's operatic warm-ups from the apartment above. The phone had been charging silently in my bedroom while I'd slept the peaceful sleep of someone whose conscience was clear. 23 calls, 6 from Benjamin, 4 from Richard, 3 from Christine, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 8 from someone listed only as the attorney. I deleted them all without listening to a single voicemail. Elena arrived for her extra English lesson promptly at 4, carrying her grammar book and a small paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. "Magdalenas," she said, using the Spanish word for the small sponge cakes. "My grandmother made them. She says food helps with difficult conversations." "What makes you think I had a difficult conversation?" Elena gave me the look that teenagers reserve for adults who underestimate their perceptiveness. "You have been different since Tuesday. Stronger, but also, how do you say, more solid?" More solid. I liked that description. The man who came to the cafe was my son.
Ah.
She nodded sagely. "The one who hurt you."
Yes.
"Did he apologize?" "He tried to, but apologies without change are just noise." We worked through the subjunctive mood for an hour, exploring the grammar of uncertainty, of wishes that might never come true, of conditions that existed only in possibility. It seemed fitting. If I were to move to London, Elena said, practicing the structure, I would miss Madrid terribly. If my son were to truly change, I found myself saying, I might consider forgiveness. Elena looked up from her notebook. "But you don't think he will change?" "No, I don't." "Then you are free." Simple words from a 17-year-old that carried more wisdom than all of Benjamin's desperate phone calls. That evening, Rosa closed the cafe early and insisted on taking me to dinner at her favorite tapas bar. We sat at a small table overlooking the Plaza de Santa Ana, sharing patatas bravas and watching the world go by. You look different, she said, echoing Elena's observation. Settled. I feel like I've finally arrived somewhere I was always supposed to be. And where's that? In my own life. Rosa raised her glass of Rioja to arriving. We clinked glasses as my phone buzzed with another call from Benjamin's attorney. I glanced at it, then turned the phone face down on the table. They're persistent, Rosa observed. They're desperate. Benjamin's business is collapsing, and apparently he needs my signature on some documents related to my old house. Will you sign them? I considered this eventually, but not because he demands it, because I choose to. The next morning brought a surprise. A knock on my apartment door at precisely 8 a.m. I opened it to find a young man in an expensive suit, clutching a briefcase and looking deeply uncomfortable. Senora Waters, my name is David Glickman. I'm an attorney representing your son, Benjamin Scott. I studied him through the partially open door. How did you get my address? We hired an investigator. Ma'am, I need to speak with you about some urgent legal matters. No, you don't. I started to close the door, but he stepped forward. Ma'am, please. Your son's business is in serious financial difficulty. There are tax implications related to your property in the United States. If you don't sign these documents, both of you could face significant legal consequences. Mr. Glickman, I want you to listen very carefully. My son chose to sever our relationship publicly and cruelly. He has made no genuine effort to repair the damage he caused. I am under no obligation to solve his problems or sign his papers simply because he's facing consequences for his poor decisions. But ma'am, furthermore, if you or anyone else attempts to harass me at my home again, I will contact the Spanish authorities and report you for intimidation. Do I make myself clear? The young lawyer's face flushed red. Mrs. Waters, your son is facing bankruptcy. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Mr. Glickman, my son publicly declared that I wasn't his real mother. He abandoned me on Mother's Day to celebrate with another woman. He treated me as disposable for years before that final humiliation. Now you want me to save him from bankruptcy? He's your son.
Yes.
And I'm his mother. A real mother teaches her children that actions have consequences. A real mother doesn't enable destructive behavior by always being available to clean up the mess. I closed the door firmly and turned the locks. Through the wood, I could hear him calling my name, his voice growing increasingly desperate. Eventually, the hallway fell silent. I made myself coffee and called Rosa. They sent a lawyer to my apartment. I told her. Bastards, you want me to call my cousin Miguel? He's with the Guardia Civil. Not yet, but thank you for the offer. What will you do? I looked around my Madrid apartment, at the plants thriving in the afternoon light, at the books I'd collected, at the photos Elena had taken of us feeding pigeons in the Retiro Park, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. I'm going to live my life, and if Benjamin wants to be part of it, he knows what he needs to do. The calls continued for 2 more weeks. Benjamin, Richard, Christine, various lawyers, and business associates. My phone became a symphony of desperation that I conducted with the simple act of hitting decline. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. 1 month later, I received an email from Donna Pelosi, my neighbor back home. Margaret. It read, "Thought you should know. Your old house sold yesterday. Benjamin had to accept a much lower offer than expected because of the rush sale. Also heard his business went into bankruptcy last week. Richard and Christine are getting divorced. Apparently, the stress was too much for their marriage. Hope you're well. The neighborhood misses you, Donna." I read the email twice, waiting for some feeling to surface. Guilt, perhaps, sadness, regret. Instead, I felt only a quiet satisfaction, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. That afternoon, Elena and I were walking through the retro park when she asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you think you'll ever speak to your son again? I considered this carefully. If he ever becomes the kind of person capable of genuine accountability, genuine change, and genuine respect for others, then yes. But I won't hold my breath waiting for that transformation. And if he doesn't change, Then I'll continue being grateful that I learned to love myself enough to walk away from people who don't value me. We stopped beside the Crystal Palace, its glass walls reflecting the late afternoon sun. Inside, tourists wandered through an art installation about memory and loss. My grandmother always said, Elena told me, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. Your grandmother sounds wise. She raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. She says life taught her that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's fear. Love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's fear. The words echoed in my mind as we continued our walk. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd confused enabling with nurturing, who'd mistaken fear of abandonment for unconditional love. She seemed like someone I'd known long ago in another life. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my journal to a fresh page. I wrote about the mother I'd been and the mother I'd chosen to become. I wrote about boundaries and consequences, about love that empowers rather than enables. And I wrote about Benjamin, not with bitterness or anger, but with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who'd finally learned to see truth without flinching. He was 36 years old enough to understand that actions have consequences. Old enough to know that love isn't a right, but a privilege that must be earned and maintained through respect and consideration. Old enough to learn that some bridges, once burned, require complete reconstruction rather than simple repair. Whether he would do that work remained to be seen, but it was no longer my responsibility to make it easy for him. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Flamco show at the Tableau tomorrow night. You free? I typed back. See, life is for living. Outside my window, Sonora Martinez began her evening performance. Something from La Traviata tonight, the notes soaring through the courtyard like a celebration. Other residents opened their windows to listen, adding their applause to the music. I opened my window, too, and leaned out into the Madrid night. Below, I could see Elena walking home from her evening English class at the community center, her head bent over her phone, probably texting her boyfriend about her dreams of studying in London. Tomorrow, I would teach my conversation classes. I would have coffee with Rosa and plan our weekend trip to Segovia. I would water my plants, read Spanish poetry, and write in my journal about the woman I was becoming. I would live the life I'd chosen, a life where I was valued, respected, and cherished. A life where I was nobody's backup plan, nobody's emergency contact, nobody's convenient solution to problems they'd created themselves. A life where I was finally truly somebody's real mother, my own. The opera singer hit her final soaring note, and the courtyard erupted in applause. I added my voice to the chorus, clapping for the beauty, the passion, the sheer audacity of making music in the darkness. It was the sound of a woman who had learned at last to celebrate herself.